Welcome guys, gals, and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joel, one of your hosts. With me as always is your other atavistic host,
Brian. Hi, how am I atavistic?
Having the quality of primeval or evolutionary reduction, I think.
Great. I see that you've prepared an answer in that situation where you presumed I didn't know what atavistic meant, instead of asking my question, which was, how am I atavistic, Joel?
Semicolon in such a way that I think might be relevant to the themes of this episode, and that is the bit.
Okay, great. Okay, what the fuck? It's Restless.
This is episode 22 of season 4 and the season finale, Restless, an episode which is good.
Yeah. So, as per usual with our season finales, we're not going to have a Bronze Panther section today. If we did, we would probably talk about what would we talk about, Joel? Taskmaster? No.
Maybe Twin Peaks. We're watching a lot of Twin Peaks.
Yeah. Anyway, we won't.
Actually, Twin Peaks would be quite like thematically relevant to this episode. But
well, yes, specifically. We'll get to that. But yeah, Restless, and it's the end of the season 4. So what I'd like to preface this with is that there are basically no essays about Buffy written that don't have some reference to Restless. The text that I'll be referring to most extensively today will be Why Buffy Matters by Rhonda Wilcox, in which she writes an entire essay or chapter about this episode. And a couple I'll refer to a couple of other things. That essay is really interesting, especially if you like T.S. Eliot, which I really, really do. And his poem, The Wasteland, because she sees a lot of similarities between the two texts. So we'll touch on that later. But yeah, Everywhere fucking writes about this specifically, this episode. And to start with, what I thought I'd say is, one of the quotes that she highlights about The Wasteland is that I can't remember who, someone said, the Wasteland cannot be read, it can only be reread. And it's so true. The Wasteland famously came with a bunch of footnotes. It is infamously difficult, twisted, with very distinct but seemingly unconnected sections. And it feels like this is the same with Buffy, this episode of Buffy. To read it is to contextualize a huge amount of the themes throughout Buffy to this point, through this season, and then reaching forward. So obviously there's lots of foreshadowing in this episode, and there's lots of thematic through lines in this episode. It feels like a real nexus. At the same time, this is going to be a whistle-stop tour of this episode. This is not conclusive. We don't have enough fucking time to go through every implication of the episode. Yeah.
So what I might suggest, and to that point, much as this episode begins in a non-traditional way with no cold open and directly into the title sequence, I might suggest, if you want to give us what this Buffy and summary covers for this episode, I might, in my own words, give a kind of a specific overview of kind of the structure of the episode, because I think a lot of the rest of our episode would be you talking and contributing very valuable critical analysis. So I would like to talk a bit as well at the start.
Okay, so here's your Buffy on summary, the last for the season. This was first aired on May 23rd, 2000. Shocking no one, it was written and directed by Joss Whedon, and as he called it, a grace note to a bit of a rocky season. And I'd agree. Here we go. Exhausted, Buffy, Willow, Giles and Xander fall asleep in front of videos. In dreams which reflect their insecurities, each is visited by a man with cheese and attacked by a mysterious being. Buffy learns from a guide with Tara's face that this is the first Slayer, who has been angered by the spell in 421, and that she has changes ahead. Buffy defeats the first Slayer. Wow, it's amazing that in that very short period of time they managed to refer to the cheese man totally unnecessarily.
And refer to the cheese man first, before the first Slayer.
And also, she doesn't defeat the first Slayer at all. She very vaguely defends against her.
We will discuss. I would specifically say that choosing not to fight is not the same as defeating, and that's notable. Also, I think Falls Asleep in Front of Videos is a fantastic album name.
Yeah, agreed.
In much as you've indicated, but this is a particularly significant, particularly well-known episode of Buffy, one in which I think we can discuss and I would argue is a microcosm of synecdoche of Buffy as a show.
Yeah.
It is incredibly moment-to-moment dense with not just relevant imagery and references, but in a way which is not overly laden in some ways. It's very much meant to be taken in and interpreted on face value.
Yeah.
And I think as an episode, it is particularly notable because it represents the accessibility of that criticism and the accessibility of those themes that we always discuss as one of Buffy's strengths.
Yeah, so I think this is one of those episodes that has a bit of density that is probably self-indulgent, but it always presents content for your average viewer, which is important.
Rich.
Yeah.
So yeah, structurally speaking, it's a coda to the season following all the stuff with Adam. They have a rare night for this season in Buffy's house, hanging out, having a social occasion.
First appearance of Joyce since the Faith episodes.
Yes. And in doing so, they each go into what has now become a very tropic television event, which is your shared dream sequence or your sequential dream sequences, and each in turn has a dream which is relevant both to their role in the enjoining spell and the role within the family unit of the Slayer,
of course,
and the way in which by invoking the essence of the Slayer they have complicated angered and challenged what it means to be a Slayer and have been in turn attacked by the first Slayer for that, but in doing so it brings in imagery from all aspects of Buffy and also questions what Buffy is actually about as an episode, and it's a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is. My one criticism, I'm gonna get that right now because it's literally just the one, is the shot where Buffy is talking to the first Slayer, and I won't refer to her as Sinea because I think that's extra televisual, right? I
have an interesting point to say to you about that, but I would say the first Slayer is probably a more meaningful way to describe her.
So when the cheese man is waving the cheese at the very end of Buffy's part, it's like, see, we're still funny. It's like, no, actually that was bad timing.
Yeah, it's a bit of an odd interruption, and as I mentioned, she is the one who has the stinger at the end of the episode. It's like, what was that weird cheese guy about? But she is also the one who most perfunctly actually encountered him. So I don't think that's not as funny as Joss Whedon thought it was.
Yeah,
I think.
It wasn't. Yeah. Anyway. So do you want to give a quick summary of the dreams as far as you can?
So essentially,
what order do they go in, Joel?
Oh, what order are they going? It is Willow, Xander, Giles, Buffy.
Which is significant because
that's the order in which they enjoy themselves during the spell and which they contributed during the spell. And I also think is useful structurally because they, in terms of what they can actually learn, I think that is the flow of how it goes, because Willow kind of engages it in an emotional way. Xander doesn't really know what's going on, but like touches a lot of different themes, a lot of different places in the dream, and Giles figures it out and is about to figure it out as Buffy comes in and is, as she is the hand, incredibly effective, and she kind of resolves it. So I think it's structurally, from a script writing point of view, it's fascinating in regards to that. But we have Willow's dream, which touches on a number of things. It has her primarily focused around the idea of her being about to go on stage for a play, which she's not prepared for, and is in a situation which everyone she knows is going to judge her, both for her lack of preparation and for showing her who she really is. So it touches on themes that have gone as far back as the talent show episode, with Sid the dummy, way back, I think, was that season 2?
Season 1.
Season 1.
So it was both, I can't remember what the episode was called, actually. Puppet Master? Anyway,
I think what we called it.
And Nightmare.
Nightmare, where she's Maggie Butterfly in that. And there's obviously fears to do with her, both her clearly painted there bright as day her sexuality and issues to do with that.
I'd agree.
But also her just general fear of performing the role of someone who's confident and who's well integrated, when fearing that she actually is still a mousy best friend kind of situation. There's some through line in all of the dreams of Tara, both as a character but also as her
soothsayer and
arguably representing the voice of the Slayer, or the first Slayer in many of these dreams. One of the interesting elements of all the dreams is that because of the dreamlike nature of it, it's really arguable whether when Scoobies appear in each other's dreams, how much of them is a dream version of themselves and how much is it them actually still connected by the spell, because there is bleed through of them trying to figure out what's happening but not also saying things that they're not saying. So that's kind of Willow's dream is primarily around that kind of performance and that exposure, and which is obviously inspired by her role as the kind of the spirit. Is that the word I want to say, spirit?
Yeah, spirit. And of course she is at the end when she is attacked by the first Slayer, her way of each of their ways of dying is significant in terms of their role. So she has her spirit sucked out of her. She's drained of life. Xander has his heart plucked out because he has the heart. And Giles he's about to be scalped because
he's the mind.
He's the mind. His tasty frontal lobes.
And then in terms of Xander's dream, as we may expect from Xander, slightly more predictable. There's a lot of sexualization to it, and which I actually think is genuinely interesting, because you have obviously this male character in a very feminist show, and how he interacts with the women, both in positive and negative and passive ways, I think is an element. I think you have to always acknowledge that. There's much more transition, I think, in his dreams, in terms of that he's constantly moving from scene to scene and doesn't really have a sense of place, and is constantly revolving back to his basement where he feels trapped and hounded by a monster at the door, which he's constantly trying to circulate out of and returning to, and then it essentially turns out to be his father is the monster trying to get in, and by his father really his situation and his sense of like inertia compared to the other characters.
For sure.
And sexualization of Joyce and sexualization of Willow and Tara, and then just a lot of imagery of him trying to help and trying to contribute and not guide Buffy, but actually be useful, and not being able to quite get there, and kind of in terms of his role. And then in terms of Giles's dream, it's much more, I think, had much more allusion to it and much more symbolism in terms of the literary sense, with him literally acting as her father, her having kind of an infantilized role, the specific relevance he has to this situation as the Watcher to the Slayer, and replicating scenes such as when he used his pocket watch at the opening of his dream is similar to when he used the same pocket watch to hypnotize her during the Cruciamentium, which is a very, that bond between the Slayer and the Watcher is kind of a very big question in terms of the first Slayer. And he does a little bit of singing, he does a little bit of exposition essentially, the kind of contextualizing what's actually happening.
It's called the exposition song.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm trying again. It's called the exposition song. Yeah. It's called the exposition song. I can't say those words apparently.
I wonder, given that you're editing, I wonder if those particular flubs will stay in this episode.
It won't stay in this episode, Joel?
My snark.
What you just said there, yeah.
And crucially, as he comes to figure out what's happening, is killed by the Slayer, and has probably one of the more, I think, affecting lines of the episode, where he says, you don't understand. You've underestimated me because you never had a Watcher. I think that's really significant in terms of what we actually come to in later in season 7. And then finally Buffy's dream is incredibly to the point in many ways. Like she has various scenes where she's trying to figure out where everyone is and why her mother is walled up in the college, living in the walls, but unpack some stuff to do with Riley and Adam and the various interplay they have there. A very significant line, I think, from that is where we see Adam in human form for the only time in the season, and there's a remark about where they get their power from and where humans get their power from, and Buffy says, referring to herself and Adam, that they're not demons, and he says, is that a fact? And that separation of what the Slayer is from a regular human is something that becomes more and more important as the show goes forward. And then eventually she confronts the first Slayer in what is presumably the desert in Africa where the Slayer line started.
Well, it's literally It's literally a California
desert,
because not just like where it's shot, but like they do go there later in the show.
Sure, yeah, but I think in terms of having all the primal scenes with the Slayer set in a desert, I think it's meant to be evocative of where it starts.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And where it starts is, the Slayer line wasn't created in California; it was created in Africa. Yeah, realistically, and then she basically delineates the difference between what the Slayer was and had to be in terms of being a killer and being a weapon and being death, and how the Slayer now means life. And in terms of how death can be a gift and something which is a creative force rather than just a constructive force, which is kind of what she comes to, I think, by season 5.
Gotcha. And then she refuses to fight the Slayer and says, "I'm going to wake up now, or I'm going to ignore you, and you're going to go away." And it works basically. She wakes up.
She says, "My power, you are not the source of my power."
Yeah, she does. So. Lots
to unpack there. Yeah.
Okay, so let's start, I think, by doing a quick thematic overview of each of the different things. I'm going to walk through my little thoughts on the different sections, like character by character, and you can let me know if you have any questions, A, and B, if you have anything to input. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, start with, at the gate, I think it's very important to look at this episode in terms of the production and the viewpoint and the visual elements of it. So visually, absolutely stunning episode, extremely overexposed in places whenever you're outside, extremely dreamlike. There's lots of very long, awkward shots. So the shots consistently cut a couple of seconds too late. There's lots of shots in which, say in Xander's dream, whenever he's attributing something to somebody, whenever what's her name, Joyce says something which is clearly Xander's psyche speaking or Xander's desire speaking, it's ADR, so it's the audio's dropped in. So you can see Joyce isn't moving her mouth.
It looks unnatural.
It looks really unnatural. The visual quality is extremely Twin Peaksy. It's all very heavy, dripping with meaning. It's visually very, very interesting.
It's lush.
It's really lush. One of the shots that's always highlighted, or at least on Wikipedia, whenever I go to see this page, anyway, is Buffy framed in the desert in the bottom right hand corner of the frame. And that's obviously very unusual photography for TV, because TV is much more typical photography. It's usually reverse shot, and it's funny because, like, these days, like, that's just doesn't look unusual at all. Like, you have Mr. Robot using like the bottom like ninth of the frame for like every shot, and like creating this insane sense of isolation, and that reads as like interesting but normal. So it's just a funny one. Okay, Willow's dream. So really beautifully opens up with Willow painting on Tara's back. She's painting, I'm presuming the poem. So it's the Sapphic poem, Ode to Athena, I want to say. Anyway, it's a Greek poem by Sappho being the most iconic kind of like lesbian character from antiquity, from the island of Lesbos, which is where the name comes from. She's writing it in Greek, and the thing that I thought of when I first watched this, when I probably fourth watched this episode when I was about 17, was the Hugh McGregor film, The Pillow Book, in which he's in China, I want to say, or maybe Japan, and a woman like paints in his skin in this fashion, and eventually skins him. You see his penis and stuff and whatever. It's a really bad movie.
Is this why you watched this film?
Huh?
Is this why you watched this film?
So what's interesting about that is that Joss Whedon was asked if he I saw a couple of places saying that he was influenced by The Pillow Book specifically here. He was asked if he'd seen it, and he said no, he hasn't, but he probably saw the poster at some point, and that probably influenced him. It's a really beautiful, really touching scene. It's very womb-like, the scene between Tara and Willow. Lots of very soft close-ups of Tara's face as she gently talks to Willow about their cat and going to the drama class and doing homework. in very prescient ways. Lots of like red drapes, and there's a harsh sunlight outside. It feels like a very safe womb-like area. What I'd like to most highlight there is they're talking about Miss Kitty Fantastico, and they've said should we be worried? We haven't chosen a name yet. And Tara says maybe we should wait for her to tell us her name. So naming conventions is going to be something to return to. I'd like to talk about it a little bit later, so just bear that in mind. Willow also asks Tara, have you told me your real name? And Tara's obviously hiding something at this point in the show. She thinks she's part demon. She isn't. And that's part of it. I thought the shot of Miss Kitty Fantastico walking towards the camera in like real close up bizarre photography with the like pounding of the drums as like if she's like a lion
stalking, right?
This is gorgeous.
I think specifically what that does very effectively is sex up that we are drawing a line between, okay, we have modern civilization, we have a certain comfort level there, but that there is a line of primal connection that connects even like a kitty cat, back to the savannah, as it were.
Absolutely, great point. And it's just a very tender, very beautiful scene. So Willow leaves to go to class. She's going to her first drama class. She meets Oz and Xander. They're talking about, Xander very quickly talks about thinking about Willow and
thinking about two women together in masturbation, essentially.
Willow and Tara doing spells together, and sometimes he thinks about them doing spells, and he does a spell too. It's just bizarre, but it very clearly paints Willow as being aware of her the perception of her in terms of being a woman and being a queer woman, and as being the object of male fantasies, fetishization, as occurs later on in the episode. So very accurate. It's also kind of a sad note for Oz because he kind of just disappears into the night after that.
I actually thought it was kind of like bizarre and remarkable that when Oz turns up in the scene, it's kind of not highlighted in the sense of like it could just be an episode from season 2 where he's just kind of turned up for this particular scene. It doesn't feel like iconic, if you know what I mean, which I think is I think it is poignant because it kind of says that like Oz could and is still of a character who could be in the Scooby Gang. He's just not there anymore. What's
weird about this episode as well is they kind of had intended for it to be like a guest character extravaganza. So like Jenny Calendar was supposed to come back.
Angel was meant to be the voice of the first Slayer.
All sorts of stuff like that. And Cordelia was supposed to come back as well, and she was supposed to be slagging Willow. But so they actually just couldn't get a lot of them. But what I thought was... Go on.
I actually think, I was thinking about that point in particular, I think it would have been too many people. I kind of feel that we already have maybe 5 or 6 guest actors who are completely out of place in this episode, not in a bad way, but just like have come back for it. I think if you add another 5 or 6 on top of that, it becomes like a bit overdone.
Fair. So she goes to drama class, and it's the first day of class, and they're putting on a production of Death of a Salesman. It's ready, and it has to be. It's the first production is today. A couple of important notes there. One, I love the portrayal of like. Do you ever read a book in a dream and you're like, this is nonsense? Yeah. Just nothing that's being said here makes any sense. It's like
it feels like it makes sense, but you know it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, you're like, well, books make sense. What I'm reading doesn't make any sense. I have no idea what's going on. So it's a real... anyway. So basically production happens. Riley is the cowboy in Death of a Salesman. There's no relation here between this production of Death of a Salesman and real life. Buffy's dressed up as Sally Bowles? I can't remember her name, from Cabaret. Harmony's there in like
Milkmaid
outfit. Anyway, so and Willow's being told, okay, the production's today, you have to be ready now. One of the things that Joss Whedon has said about this episode is that it feels like people keep saying to her they're going to see the real you, or like we already know basically, and the suggestion there is like, oh, it's actually that she's scared that people find out that she's queer, and that's supposed to be a bait, and the actual problem is that she's scared that people will see that she's still a weak, exposed nerd essentially inside of it all. And that's what Joss Whedon said, is that like it's supposed to be a bait and switch. I kind of disagree. we'll talk about, Joss Whedon's perspective on this episode and the death of the author a little bit later, because I think there's a very inherent queer content there of, what this person fears. Like, even if they're currently comfortable with themselves, it doesn't mean that they're afraid part of them goes away inside and stuff.
I think in terms of that, you have, as you said, one angle, which is Joss's perspective, that like, oh, what I intended for it to be, the audience thinks that she's still nervous about this to this degree, but she's not actually. She's nervous about this. And I think this is where, as you say, the text itself and from the reading from an actual minority perspective, like, oh no, Joss, she is still afraid. Because it reads, it feels, and no matter how confident Willow is at a person at any point in her future, she's still afraid of that on some level, and no amount of authorial intent changes that.
I agree. So that's all fun. Not fun at all. There's a really incredible shot where Buffy is shouting at Riley, and Riley's face is directly up against the camera, unmoving, very close to the camera, and Buffy's in the mid-ground, shouting at him about genitals, kind of, and then Harmony is crying in the background, and there's a body on the floor. All of them are in focus, and it's a really fascinating technique used there. They used Fraser lenses, F-O-R-A-Z-I-E-R, and what Fraser lenses are very large, very long, weird lenses which have sets of prisms inside them, so that you can set it so that you have multiple planes of focus within one shot. So it's kind of like a split diopter shot, but more complicated. That's how you achieve that, and it's really it's very intense, very fascinating, very distancing and deliberate and bizarre looking, but really, really fascinating.
It's also noticeable that Harmony is present, playing both in some ways her pre and post vampire selves, and there's projection here in terms of where Giles is playing kind of a slightly more artistic, effete kind of stage director, and there's just recurring motif for performance, so that's kind of very much embedded in this.
Absolutely. So performance we're definitely going to talk about a bit later, especially we'll talk about that later, but performance huge here in terms of both and just like fourth wall breaking and that kind of Shakespearean meaning stuff. From there, Willow escapes through a set of loads of red curtains away from the play, apparently not intended as a Twin Peaks reference, but very, very
inevitably in some ways.
Lots of red curtains equals Twin Peaks. And she finds Buffy. Buffy helps her, and they escape into a classroom where Willow is asked to give a presentation. It's her book club report, and it's from when she read Lion Witch in the Wardrobe over the summer. She has her costume taken off deliberately by Buffy, which, being unclothed aggressively by another person in a dream is very invasive, very disturbing imagery.
Very outing.
Absolutely. And she's revealed to be wearing the clothes she wore in Welcome to the Hellmouth, and
iconic.
Long, lank red hair, very
Mennonite dress.
And the prophet, the harvest. That's what I was trying to reach for there.
I would say that's probably. I'm pretty certain that's a classroom. It's one of the high school set classrooms, and it feels like she's like computer class, Jenny Calendar kind of thing. So it's very much placing her visually back in that era as well.
100%. And a lot of people have pointed out over the years, the Lion, the Witch in the Wardrobe, a very beautiful synecdoche of of her section generally. It opens up with a little line, Miss Kitty Fantastico. She's the witch, and she has been crawling. The wardrobe being her clothes being ripped off her. They talk a lot about costume being in character, because basically when she meets Buffy, who has gotten ready for the role, she's like, "Oh, I see you're already in costume," and it's Willow wearing her normal comfortable clothes
outfit. Yeah.
And when it's being ripped off her, there you go. So the wardrobe, and apparently there's a lesbian, or maybe not lesbian, but there's one of the fan sites used to be called The Lion, the Witch, and the something. Whatever. We're not going to talk about The Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe though. Otherwise, as illusion, I don't think it's too useful here.
It's all Christian imagery.
Yeah, like beyond Aslan equals Jesus, very simple stuff. And Giles later on talks about the blood of the lamb, which of course is a reference to Jesus' sacrifice. Very Buffy is Jesus, blah, blah, blah. Grand. And as is happening, while her friends are watching, and do not give a shit because no one really likes her, no one really cares about her. They all see that she is a scared, lacking person inside. The first Slayer jumps in her and sucks her spirit out. And that's the end of the Willow's dream. So one of the things I want to highlight there is that she does see the desert out of her bedroom with Tara. The desert represents fear, knowledge that cannot be obtained, endlessness,
lack of home.
Yes, absolutely. And I think this section really highlights Willow's growth from her initial appearances to now, and how kind of in a really appropriate way that the fears that you have reoccur, that kind of like, characters, who you are as a child kind of like doesn't ever leave, etc. Cool. I liked it. Do you have any other thoughts about the Willow section?
I like when Buffy plays stupid.
Yeah, me too.
There's a significant variety of scenes in the 7 seasons of this show where Sarah Michelle Gellar plays like a dumber version of herself, which are just quite fun to watch.
Absolutely. So Xander's section. Xander opens up with is still like very classic TV tropic kind of way, thinks he's still awake because he's still watching
Apocalypse Now. And you inform me that the scene on television is not actually from Apocalypse Now.
It is not, and it's recreated later on by Xander, which is funny. It's not from Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now, of course, being it's not a hugely relevant text here, except for the fact that I think it's a denser, more difficult text than Xander is able for, and it also lends a very useful pun here. Can you spot it, babe? What does Willow refer to this? What does she refer to Apocalypse Now as? Too much of?
I've gone completely blank.
She says it's a little too Heart of Darknessy.
Yes, but like, is Apocalypse Now not just based on a Heart of Darkness?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Apocalypse Now, based on a Heart of Darkness by Conrad.
The Tables of Turn.
Joseph Conrad. Joseph Conrad. From in the 1910s, 1920s, about basically man in Vietnam. This is Apocalypse Now. Man in Vietnam going to assassinate a previous military general from the Americans who has defected, essentially. Gone rogue, gone wild, gone native.
Mad King.
Going native is such a fascinating phrase and such a fascinating continuous trope through military stories, and it's great. Anyway, it's deeply racist, of course, but it's fascinating. We'll talk about that another time, maybe. But the pun, of course, there being that Xander is the heart, and that's the heart being what he gets pulled out of him at the end of it. Heart of Darknessy. Also, fascinating, or interestingly, the documentary about Apocalypse Now, which was actually really good, is called Hearts of Darkness. So
I think there's an interesting allusion there where at one point I think Jaws says that, or there's some conversation in Dream about the film where they say it's all just a load of violence so far. Sounds like, oh no, it gets better later on. I think there's a line to be drawn there, but with shows like this and with Buffy, where initially it's like, oh, it's just people killing vampires.
That's interesting though. Yeah,
like soaking. Like we get to Restless. Yeah, absolutely.
So from there, what happens is that there's a couple of different points. Xander continuously feels left behind. Specifically, Willow and Tara invite him to come have sex with them, basically, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'll be with you now." And he never quite gets there because that's kind of the dream thing, is that you're pursuing something and there's a great promise to something and you keep continuously lose it and can't find it.
I have always thought the Xander sequence in this was the best representation of that feeling in a dream of you move on from a section, you want to go back but you can't find the door back. It's very evocative in that way.
Absolutely. He, as you highlighted, he continuously finds himself back in the basement of his house, where he is stuck. He is stuck in the id. He feels continuously delayed by his inability to have higher function in terms of his processing of things. He feels trapped by his sexual let me try it again, by his sexual tendencies. So the way he sexualizes both all of Tara, Willow and Joyce in this episode is really emblematic of his inability to view women as other people, I think, in some ways, and to deeply sexualize them to the point of them having no voice beyond the voice he attributes to them. I think it's very important that when Buffy sees him, she calls him Big Brother. She's very infantilized. She's sitting in a sandbox, and it's actually the desert or whatever. And he
like in Rugrats.
Yeah, in Rugrats, yeah. That's a really good point, actually. But she calls him Big Brother, and he says brother, and he kind of like looks out into the distance and kind of has a moment of realization that the sexual relationship he wants to have with Buffy has to conclude here, and he has to remove himself from that. I
think being generous to Xander, which is something I've grown into over the years, I think he definitely has all these inherent problems. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's important to have a male character in this show, have a man in this show who is problematic in that way, in that kind of societally embedded way, and which he has contributed to. And I think he tries to grow, but I think it's important to show that you don't reach a point where your growth is finished. I think he's benignly and not maliciously looking at Willow and Tara and seeing them very sexualized, but he's trying to move towards the meaning of things. And I think it's significant that the two people he doesn't sexualize in his dream, or the two women he doesn't sexualize in his dream, is Buffy
and Anya.
Yeah.
So I kind of looked at the structure of his section, but he walks upstairs from having been watching the movie with the guys, and Joyce is waiting for him there in a red dress, red being sin and temptation and sexuality. And she has no voice, and she must scream. And she invites him into bed. Deeply, like lots of Greek references in this episode throughout. When Willow is standing up in front of the class, Anya says, "Oh my God, it's like a tragedy. It's exactly like a Greek tragedy. There should only be Greeks." Willow's obviously writing in Greek on Tara's back. And here it's a very clearly Oedipal moment for Xander, where he wants to fuck a mother figure, basically. So that's great. He then kind of like goes off into he goes to find Buffy and Willow. Buffy, Giles and Spike are swinging together in a moment where everyone has highlighted that they're recreating or pre-recreating the moment. In Tabula Rasa, where Giles and Spike think they're father and son. Yeah,
Spike says, Giles isn't going to be watcher. He says, "I've got the stuff." And Giles says, "I think of Spike as a son." It makes all... I think there are both those episodes play on... There are weird similarities between Spike and Giles' characters that I don't think are necessarily you expected when you first see them in season 2.
Yeah, no, for sure. So... And then he has this very odd moment where he's looking at himself. He's watching him. He's standing there talking to them and watching himself in the ice cream van. And the perspective of which Xander is the determining viewpoint really disseminates and really blurs itself, which is really fascinating. And eventually turns into Xander in the ice cream van, who talks to Anya and has like a really bizarre green screen thing happening in the background.
Yeah, when he goes to crawl, which I think is a great shot, is him moving backwards and backwards in the van, like going further and climbing higher. But the green screen like fails at the last second. You just see
it's because it was not supposed to be in widescreen, so it's not in the original cut.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think? I'll just maybe interject on this section a little bit now. What do you think about the fact that he does two things? One, he perceives Anya and Tara in this way where they're clearly this hyper-sexualized version of two women together that is very much the male gaze and male view.
Yeah, you mean Willow and Tara, I presume.
What did I say?
Anya.
I don't know why I said Anya. Willow and Tara, who are in a relationship. And the fact that from his perspective, with the shot on him, we have them kissing extensively. In what is their first kiss and their first sexual contact, and very sexualized.
They had to really push for like even the length of kissing they did there. Apparently, the network really wanted to cut it back.
But you see, like even without the shot on them, in the shots we do have, they're in lingerie. Willow is rubbing Tara's leg. Like it's actually quite a lot in a good way for where they are, where they've gotten to so far. Bizarrely, I think.
But it's really sad because it portrays them as through such a male gaze perspective. It's like,
weird.
oh, this is acceptable when it's for horny men, but when it's, you know, women actually expressing affection and love for each other, that's like not okay.
Yeah, but that's kind of text of the situation as well. As, you know, I think with all the best interpretation, I don't think Joss Whedon didn't know that when he's putting that in.
I think the portrayal of Willow and Tara in that moment in their schoolgirl skimpy outfits, it's very tattoo.
The band,
TATU. Yeah. I mean, it's very self-awarely male gazy. Anyway, so yeah, eventually the door does come open from Xander looking upstairs. Oh, he also recreates a moment in Apocalypse Now, which I think is reasonably thematically light. I think it's a shot for shot. Armin Shimmerman is back. He's playing Schneider in his last appearance, unfortunately, and he has a shot for shot remake of the Marlon Brando scene. One of the Marlon Brando scenes from Apocalypse Now, where he's doing the like putting the water in his head because it's so warm out and stuff, and it's kind of gross. And yeah, so basically the father figure comes through. It's the first only time we see Xander's father, and I think, right? Yeah,
it's the only time we see him. And actually, I thought it was quite a valuable scene because you really get because obviously that's all drawn from truth. Do you know what I mean? For Xander. And I think you get a real sense of everything Xander has done in terms of so closely associating with the Scoobies. It is because he's ashamed of his situation, and he's really trying to make a life where they don't see what he really is from his perspective. I think a lot about his anger can be inferred very charitably from the fact that he keeps coming back to that basement.
So obviously I think it's a very clear metaphor. He's stuck. He can't escape the situation he is in. So it's a really sad portrayal of poverty and social class.
And I think it suggests that for all Xander's flaws, it seems like he's much further along than where his father is, and I think in some ways that has to be incorporated into the character.
I think so too. And then his heart's plucked out by Sanaya. Kind of a
thankfully very short shot of the heart, because I imagine it probably doesn't look great as a prop.
I'd agree. Yeah. Okay. So Giles's section, yes, definitely a lot more thematically heavy. You open with him hypnotizing Buffy. Buffy in both Giles's and Xander's sections quite infantilized in a quite upsetting way, I think. Giles' one is very much about his responsibility towards Buffy and his sense of I think the Helpless episode where she had to do the Cruciamentum really comes back here, because he's obviously using the same watch he was using there to hypnotize her, and it's kind of signifying the control, responsibility he has, and meaning that he had as a watcher. I think that meaning really was lost in Helpless, and he never really regained it. She didn't have a watcher from that point. So one of the consistent readings of Olivia, so basically she goes to the carnival with Buffy, Olivia, and Olivia's pushing an empty baby cart. It's a carnival in a cemetery. What did I say it called?
You think it called a baby cart?
Yeah, I wasn't sure. Anyway, whatever. A pram. So Olivia is pushing this empty pram. A lot of people have read that as kind of the important decision that Giles has to make. You know, is he going to continue to pursue this kind of lost relationship with Buffy? It's not the lost relationship, but this lost responsibility with Buffy, where he makes his whole life about her, basically. Or is he going to try to pursue a life, family, happiness otherwise, represented by Olivia, and the empty baby carriage, which represents potential. When he goes into Spike's crypt, which is surrounded by garden gnomes, because why not? He sees Olivia crying in the corner with an overturned baby cart, signifying that he has rejected that, he has lost that. And so it's kind of sad, it's very Ulyssean, I was going to say. It's very Circe being the section in Ulysses in which it's essentially a play, a really impossible, nightmarish play, and that's the structure for the whole episode. It's the longest episode of Yossi's, and it concludes with Leo Bloom like grieving his dead son, who doesn't really exist there. It's very empty, like, you know, the child doesn't exist kind of image. I thought it was really
empty child. As last we see of Olivia.
It's the last we see of Olivia, unfortunately. And from there, he talks to Spike a little bit, and he goes to fight Buffy then, does he? No, what happens next?
I think there's a segment of moving through different spaces, and he ends up in the bronze.
Yeah, he ends up in the bronze, thanks. And he's watching Anya do stand-up, really, really bad stand-up. And
you can tell it's a dream because people are laughing.
Yeah, exactly. He tries to talk to Xander and Willow about what we should do about the whole situation, and he eventually gets up and, being the mind of the group, does his exposition song where he says, like, we've angered the first Slayer.
He assumes it's the primal evil that was provoked by the spell, which I think is significant.
It is significant. We should also talk about the motivation of the first Slayer here, because I don't think it's just that, like, you know, oh, you interrupted me. I think she's deeply angry because of what they did. It's because they tried to take the Slayer power into multiple people. It's like from multiple people. That's like when she was so alone, you know.
No, when we get to the next section, I have some thoughts specifically on the first Slayer.
Great. So, oh my god, this is taking so long. We're already on 46 minutes.
It's long. It's about long things.
So,
this will not fit in a tweet, dear listener.
So, Giles then, is, after having sung the song, is pursued by the first Slayer, and he says, "I know what you are. I can fight you with my brain." And
with my enormous galaxy brain thoughts.
And she proceeds to scalp him, saying, when he's saying, you had no watch or whatever, and there's like a really stunning, disturbing shot of a very close up of Anthony Stewart's head with blood running down his face, left to right, basically, and it's really cool. And then you move into Buffy's dream. So Buffy's dream.
We haven't acknowledged any of these three dreams so far, but there is a man with cheese.
Like, I'm not going to acknowledge that in the podcast. It's useless.
Okay.
Like, Joss Whedon has said, like, oh yeah, it's totally meaningless, and other people have read it in terms of, like, what meaning it might have.
It's just meant to be there to identify that sometimes dreams just have elements that don't make any sense.
Yeah, and we can go into the other theory of it, but, like, you know, whatever. So, Buffy's dream, really fascinating. She opens with, what does it open with? Oh yeah, so she's looking at the bed. She said, "I just made this bed with faith," and it's the bed that they were making in one of her pressing dreams previous. And I think
this year's girl.
Was this year's girl? I think there was also some like mess in the dreams in Graduation Part 1 as well.
Absolutely.
Or part 2 actually. So there's lots of call forwards there where Tara is there. She's talking about how you don't know who you are, you don't know what you'll become, and be back before the dawn. There's a whole thing about SNAM because there's a Sony clock that's showing 7:30, which was the initial 730 days before the dawn, because that's when dawn. It was 2 years until Dawn's appearance in the show. And it also, when they showed the Manus, when Tara shows her the Manus card, Manus being the hand, that's what Buffy is. It says it's presented upside down, so it's Sunam, and people have tried to read that into that. I don't really care though.
So the 7:30 countdown, which is in Fake's dream, and this is actually to Buffy's death in the gift.
Oh, sorry, you're right.
But it's deeply tied to Dawn and what she can give.
Yeah, I was thinking 365 days before the dawn, or 300 something days before the dawn. Yes, good point. And they say, oh, that clock's wrong now, it's much closer now, so Buffy's death is more imminent. That's fine, and it's nice that it kind of reaches forward, because it does mean that the episode has to be forced to be watched in the context of the entire show, / up until season 5. Anyway, Buffy's dream has a couple of different elements. She goes to the initiative.
The initiative. Yeah.
Adam and Riley are there. They're talking. They're basically talking about taking over the world. It's kind of a sense of Buffy still doesn't quite trust Riley. She thinks that he is part of this machine, that he has this demon inside of him.
Doesn't really know what his job is, I think.
Yeah, that's so true.
He says that he was being debriefed and they made him the Surgeon General.
Yeah, he sure does. Him and Adam are talking, and there's some more talk of names. So they say that they're doing the important work of naming all the things.
Which is a very patriarchal kind of thing.
Yeah, like, so actually let's get into now. So naming conventions is this episode, really fascinating. You have the very feminist, very soft concept of naming that, you know, a thing will tell you its name. And you could read into that like a kind of determinism, but I don't think it's useful. A thing that you get from Willow and Tara talking about Miss Kitty Fantastico. And then you have this very listing, aggressive patriarchal perspective of naming of Adam and Riley, and Adam's name is highlighted as well. Buffy says, like, you know, what was your name before this? I presume she means the man who Adam was, and he says, not a man among us knows.
Yeah.
And of course, Adam's name highlighted there really ties back to the biblical roots of the character. And Adam, as the biblical character, was of course the namer of things. Adam named everything in the world. So you have that like aggressive patriarchal structure, but then you also have a pre-gender structure of naming, pre-Garden of Eden kind of thing, where things are nameless, and in that nameless space you have the first Slayer who has no name and who has no voice. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be read into that. What's really interesting about that is I actually haven't watched the director's commentary of this episode. I really should. We were talking about this beforehand, but I'm a bad person. And apparently Joss Whedon has said that some fans have written about that interaction between the kind of like the feminine approach to naming, the patriarchal approach to naming, and he's like, oh, that wasn't intentional, but it's a great interpretation. Intention here useless, whatever. So that's all great.
Well, I think intention is built into that very point, which is that, you know, the patriarchal or the male driven sense of criticism would say, if I haven't named this, I guess I'm there.
Exactly.
And,
if I haven't given this if I haven't ascribed this meaning into this area, then it doesn't exist potentially. There's a Joss Whedon approach, and then, like, you know,
things come from a wellspring of naturally organic developed meaning, and
also just like taking texts from the creator, like, you know, post creator world, like, I mean, and what's the ultimate expression of taking a text from creator? It's fan fiction and fan interpretation. And who does fan fiction and fan interpretation? For the vast majorities of cases, women and queer people. Yeah.
When they say big A do crime, what they mean is specifically stealing texts from male authors.
Absolutely. So, great stuff. You then have Buffy. She goes to college. She sees Giles, or she briefly paints herself in some mud. Sarah
Michelle Gellar, like a trooper, putting it all in her hair as well.
Yeah. In a moment which is, I think, meant to reflect the first Slayer and to feel like, you know, kind of a camouflaging, kind of like a removing of her identity in a way that the first Slayer can identify with and is her only weapon, because her weapon bag is empty except for all this mud. Anyway, she sees Joyce in the walls, hidden in the walls. Really, I think it's my favorite like set piece of the whole show is Joyce in the walls and some mice nibbling at her feet while she's learning to play mahjong. In a very clear metaphor of Buffy has put her mother and the matriarchal structure and what women can do in a very small confined space. And there's not very much freedom, but, like, you know, Joyce emits kindness regardless.
Yeah. And Joyce says, well, I think you're strong enough, you could break it down if you want. And Buffy gets distracted and walks off because she's following Xander. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of precipice there of about to be. Yeah. Agreed.
There's also a lot of, I think we haven't highlighted this yet, but Buffy's fear that's highlighted significantly in this episode. And Giles' fear was, you know, his lack of meaning or his lack of direction and his fear that he's losing Buffy and he doesn't have a life for himself. And Buffy's feeling and fear in this episode very specifically is abandonment and loneliness, and everyone else kind of like has a lot of interaction in their sections. Buffy's mostly very distant and alone, which is very sad. It's also, of course, very thematically important in terms of why she can defeat the first Slayer and why she can defeat anything, is that she has her community, she has her people around her. so Buffy's very alone. She goes to the desert. She finds the first Slayer. She says, I shop, I sneeze, and that's why I'm not alone.
There are trees in the desert since you moved out, and I'll be a fireman when the floods roll back.
Yeah, so
that's some Twin Peaks shit right there.
It's some Twin Peaks shit. It's some very Elliot shit as well. Like, water is our rebirth, and healing. Anyway, it's all great stuff. The first Slayer has some beautiful lines spoken through Tara, like, I live in the action of death, blood cry, penetrating wound, I am destruction alone. And yeah, so we're gonna have to really unpack the wholeness of what it means to the first Slayer and stuff. So do you want to
let's talk about the first Slayer.
Tell me some shit there.
So specifically, your point about naming the first Slayer and how commonly in expanded fiction she's called Sanaya, that's actually taken from the enjoining spell.
Okay.
So in the spell, they call upon Sanaya to grant the power. So that's kind of where it's been inferred from, which is ambiguous. I think there's a fascinatingly dense relationship here in terms of, we find out later in season 7 that the first Slayer was created when the Shadow Men, who are the progenitors of what's now the Watchers Council, thematically raped the Slayer.
Yes. Tied
her up, forced a demon into her, bonding her with the power of a demon to fight other demons, and that is trauma. And what the Slayer is not physical death inherently. It is the wound. It is the open wound, the unvoiced and unvoiceable.
Yeah.
The trauma and the pain that can't be named. And so I think that is
very trauma theory, Kathy Carruth, that we've talked about before.
Yeah, exactly. As we blithely reference, I have no mouth but I must scream, etc. So I think that the relationship there in terms of what the Slayer's motivation is, she's clearly not a monster, and it's clearly not to actually kill them or punish them, but it is a sense of traumatically and reflexively lashing out at something to protect yourself, and overcorrection.
Yep.
And the sense that all the Slayer has and all that she's being allowed to define herself by and is the killing, the act of killing. And she has integrated that to some degree by owning that, by saying this power is mine and this act is the power of the Slayer. And so there's an overprotectiveness where other people share it, and a sense of, this is the only thing that I have, this is the only thing that we are, that sets us apart. Why dilute it? And obviously the thing that Buffy understands, and the show tries to say, and ultimately says in such, I think, a beautiful way with the season 7 finale, is that sharing your power doesn't dilute it, it amplifies it. And there's a direct thread, I think, between this and that. And obviously with Buffy's death and the gift, showing that the death and the killing can be in service of something not structural or patriarchal, but something
personal,
communal and personal and intimate. So I think the interaction between the two is not a rejection in the total sense. There's obviously a sense of, okay, you've had your time and you are part of this, but we have moved on from this. And she says, this is not how we do things now.
Yeah.
You are not the source of my power. But I think it would be a flat interpretation to think that she either fights, kills, or defeats the first Slayer, that she overpowers her, that she says that she's stupid or wrong or any of this. What Buffy is doing is integration.
Yep.
It is understanding that pain, but then not being defined by that pain. And so I think there's something to be said for the fact that the relationship, which is so integral to her development and one of her most positive relationships with Giles as a Watcher, is the relationship of the oppressor and the oppressed, and is an abusive relationship between the Watchers. Have an abusive relationship with the Slayers, fundamentally. And the fact that from that they're both trying to make something which is redefines that, grows past that, and the implicit thematic link there between the relationship between men and women and between sexism and misogyny and all that. I think it's really fundamental that they can go into the edge of a collapsed Sunnydale at the end of the show and stand side by side in something new, but which takes the best parts, the most useful parts of what the first Slayer had, and the good that came out of this terrible thing, and and move forward. But I think there is an essential initial rejection there required. She doesn't defeat the First Slayer. She says, I'm not interested. I won't give you the power to hurt me.
Absolutely. There's a really fascinating power struggle there as well, just generally, because obviously the First Slayer is so lacking in privilege, not in a Tumblr kind of way, but like in a genuine, deep way that Buffy is not used to. A lot of people have read the fact that Tara speaks for her and that she has no voice as being like difficulty in representation of minorities. So Lynn Edwards says it's troubling in Slaying Black and White, which is a great essay I've referred to quite a bit before.
Something we should actually specifically highlight, which I don't think we've mentioned explicitly, is that the First Slayer is black.
Yes, yeah. First Slayer is black and she has no voice. I think that the fact that she has no voice, Tara must speak for her. I think that's an aware comment on the double othering the subaltern. So the First Slayer is deeply a portrayal of the subaltern. She is colonized both by being a woman and by being black. She cannot speak in this foreign land, and I think Buffy's reaction to her is to defeat her through an act of speech, which is both very sad for the First Slayer because she had no option to do any of these things. She was entirely alone. She had no community. But it's also important for Buffy's character. And I think it's a deep, sticky interaction between, that kind of the whiteness that Buffy represents and the privilege, where it's like where it absolutely suggests in some ways that Buffy is, is negatively privileged, but I would read it as, things are better, or this is what we should be striving for,
It's the in many ways we position Buffy as privileged because she's like a comfortable white person in a modern country and all that kind of stuff. But this show is still about how women are disadvantaged and disprivileged, that's not a word, but in a position of disadvantage in the world. And with any minority struggle, with any communal struggle, there will always be that sense of poignancy where if you do better than I have done, and if I create a world where you can do better, you won't understand in an intimate way how bad things were for me, and that I have to let that go, and you have to let me go, because in some ways all I'm about is what happened to me. Yeah. So Buffy can't understand the First Slayer, and probably shouldn't to a certain degree. Yeah. Because she has to do something. She has to do something new.
Buffy's greatest ability is to not be defined by her pain, and that is through partially privilege. So yeah, okay, that's kind of like, I think that's a good overview of the episode, so let's get into the meat of the discussion.
Yeah, that's our Restless stop tour.
Okay, so I think that should definitely be the majority of what we say here. I think the important points to take away are it's the First Slayer has the ability to pursue these characters on the basis of their deepest fears, because they have opened themselves to her, they've taken her power into them, they've stolen her power to some degree, and she's angered by the fact that they can share it, that they have that community. And this is the thing that we've always noted about Buffy. It's what Adam noted about Buffy, or Spike noted about Buffy in the Yoga Factor, is Buffy's greatest strength is her friends, her community, and her self-determination. I think that the desert, Rhonda Wilcox specifically quotes Joseph Campbell here, what she says that like the desert generally represents that it's used for the projection of the unconscious content. So the desert being the wide, open, unknowable, unformed, mystic area, traditionally. It's a really fascinating image. I think the reason that Buffy is able to defeat the First Slayer in a way that the others aren't is that both she's able to bring together the strengths that all her friends lend her, and also she's the one who is most willing to become alone and go deepest out into the desert to stray and to figure it out, because she can be alone because she knows that she has that community.
I think it also speaks against a bias that there is something stronger about primacy, and that the first Slayer has to be stronger. And
Undiluted.
Yeah, and
not in a racial way. That's awful. Go on.
No, but like undiluted. Pure. The we see this so often in society in the sense that things that are older are inherently better. And that's not to say that the Slayer isn't strong, but that Buffy can equally be strong.
Yeah.
That things are flat and things are radial and cyclical as opposed to hierarchical, and I think that's what it speaks to.
Yeah. One more note actually for my naming convention conversation here is that Adam and Riley both refer to Buffy consistently as killer, so they're defining her by what she does. It's like also like a diminutive term in lots of ways. It's like very like childish, but I thought it was a very interesting note.
Specifically, it is used diminutively, and it's something which Faith is obviously specifically afraid of in terms of what she inherits from the Slayer history. She is a killer, as opposed to she's obviously so emphatically delineates between a Slayer and a killer, which is a similar delineation which happens, I think, in the military, in the sense of like, oh no, I didn't murder someone, I killed them in the course of war.
Absolutely. Okay, so the other two topics I want to talk about are The Wasteland, just because it's a great essay and it's worth reading, and the kind of Shakespearean life's a stage kind of tropes here. So this kind of Macbeth, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, and Sound and Fury signifying nothing, life is a stage, kind of is a very existential concept. So it really fits in with the themes of Buffy generally. You have it really played out in a way here that I think is brought to its zenith. Zenith is like highest point? Yeah, okay. In Once More with Feeling, in which one of the like most highlighted lines in the episode is like, life's a stage and we all play a part, right? Is that life's a stage?
Okay, I was going to say that as well. Okay. And you've robbed us of that. But,
sorry. Okay. So in this episode, you have Anya on stage performing her spoken word, performing her character. Willow obviously is deeply afraid of being introduced to the stage, being exposed. They say at one point that of course everyone Willow knows, and all of us, of course, are out in the.
We're all out there as well.
Out there as well. It's very fourth wall breaking. It's very the suggestion that these characters are being torn from the screen. You have an even more aggressive note of fourth wall breaking and that kind of trope when you see the characters wander from set to set. So you'll have Xander walking from his basement into. This is a complete example because I can't remember, but into like the actually no, it's Giles walking from his apartment into the bronze, and that just seems so dreamlike, and it's actually just because the set is constructed that way. So you're actually seeing a behind the scenes shot basically of the thing. And when Xander comes back to his basement at one point, he's actually walking through a bunch of like behind the sets, like exposed wood kind of stuff. So it feels very, very fourth wall breaking. And then of course you have Giles ultimately singing his exposition song, which again extremely fourth wall breaking, aware of the text, awareness of your role, the concept that you narrativizing and giving meaning is the only meaning inherent or that exists to something.
And I think it's a great example of, I think we went through a period culturally where we said that any fourth wall breaking was trite or was overused, and I think it has been overused massively in some things.
Agreed.
But like all tropes, it can be used effectively. You don't have to be ashamed of using a trope, and I think it's used deftly here.
Agreed. And then The Wasteland, 100% recommend going off and reading J. Alfred Prufrock, which is a different love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, which is a different poem by T.S. Eliot. It's way shorter. You get a lot of the same goodness out of it. And if you really like that, read The Wasteland as well. It's about 20 pages long, but it is a poem. Rhonda Wilcox draws a lot of comparisons here. She says that, very interestingly, the footnotes of The Wasteland, which are really famous because there are so many footnotes to the poem, it's almost the same length as the poem itself, or the footnotes, or maybe even longer. And the equivalent here will be both the extensive online commentary for the episode and Joss Whedon's DVD commentary, stuff like that. So yeah, you have lots of different comparisons here. So Joss Whedon has specifically said that the episode was written as a tone poem, which you can totally see. There's lots of lines which just don't have meaning, that feel right.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of dream logic. It's really good. The wasteland, the central image of the wasteland itself, very reflected in the desert, and the desert representing stillness, a loss, and Buffy then representing the rebirth there, in a way that also recurs in the wasteland of the flood, and flood, of course, also being insignificant for Buffy because she did die by drowning, and was given birth again through water.
Biblical implications there, but also specifically the flood being an image that connects a lot of different cultures.
Absolutely. Did we talk about the blood of the lamb?
You mentioned that it had
Jesus-y.
Messianic implications.
Yeah, so like very briefly, it's Giles says it, blood of the lamb and all that stuff. So it's blood of the lamb is a representation of Jesus's self-sacrifice, and that's reflected in Buffy's dying previously, and also her future dying, and her general messianic perspective. Lots of Jesus imagery in the wasteland, would you believe? There's lots of imagery of tarot cards in the wasteland, which we see here as well, both from Primeval, very clearly. And then towards the end of the episode, when Buffy is looking at the tarot cards.
Yeah. Fascinatingly confident shot where they actually insert the
moving
images inside the tarot she's holding.
Yeah, exactly. And her tarot, her future, being her friends, which I think is actually quite moving. So I think the it just, if you want to read it, I'm not going to bore us with extensive details, mainly because I didn't take that many notes about it. But if you want to read about the comparisons between the episode of Buffy, Restless, and The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, please do read the Rhonda Wilcox book. Actually, that book I would just recommend it. I disagree with so much of it, but yeah, Why Buffy Matters. It's very well written, to be honest.
So disagreements are useful.
Yeah. Okay. Shall we move on to the dusting there, Joel?
Yeah, sure.
Great. What's the
I can't remember how we do it, yeah.
So, death count, 0.
0, no actual deaths in the episode.
Yeah.
Death of the season. Death of a salesman.
Death of a salesman. So, 1 death. Fashion notes.
Like lots of great fashion in it. Willow's iconic dress returning is a high point for me, absolutely. I think notable fashion obviously being the as you say, the bizarre tattoo dresses that Willow and Tara wear. The cowboy outfit that Riley wears is fantastic. Buffy in that Liza Minnelli wig is absolutely striking. And I think that they actually one thing I will note is the way that the first Slayer is styled. In terms of her face paint and her rags and all that, it is quite striking.
I agree.
Costuming as well.
I worry it's a little reductive in terms of the
It's absolutely, definitely reductive, but that might be not unavoidable. But that is what it is, and we can take again the positives from it. That I think it is. She absolutely has agency in this episode.
Yeah. Some Buffy bits for you. So yeah, we were talking about the Fraser lenses previously. I really like those. Apparently Michelle Trachtenberg was brought onto the set for this episode specifically, and I just just to see what it was like. I have to imagine it was fucking mad watching it. This is the final Snyder appearance even.
The Snyder experience.
And Armin Shimmerman actually watched Apocalypse Now for the first time to do this, while he actually has done an impression of Marlon Brando in Apocalypse Now before for Voyager, apparently.
So for DS9. But I think I think for Buffy he made a reference to it as Snyder. He says something like, "I love the smell of scared teenager in the morning," or something like that.
Okay.
I don't know any references. I'm sure he did do some references on DS9.
So there's no cold open in this episode. The only other time that happens is Once More with Feeling. And Joyce and Riley finally meet for the first time. Yeah,
which I think is kind of a bit of a row from a plotting perspective, where it's like,
Anya and the Cheeseman are the only characters to appear in all 4 dreams, which is interesting. Though Tara appears in 3 of them, and this is the last appearance of Oz, Olivia, and Snyder.
R.I.P.
Do you have any Buffy bits there, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the carnival scene, the sideshow that Buffy takes part in is Crack the Drac, and it's Dracula, and Dracula
Dracula's going to be the next episode.
In the next episode. And yeah, as you mentioned, or as you alluded to, in the scene in Buffy's bedroom where they look at the clock, the clock has some letters blocked out, and it spells Manus because she's the hand in the enjoining spell.
Was the thing you're going to say that the best line of the episode is when Anya says, "I think I figured out how to steer it by gesturing emphatically."
Yeah, I knew you would like that. Yeah, and then otherwise, I suppose just the episode is really rife with allusions to things to come, even insofar as like Anya saying she's thinking about getting back into vengeance again, which is something specifically she does. She does end up doing. So yeah, it's that's there as well.
Okay, Joel, do you have a rating for me?
I would give this episode 10 out of 10, and that sound was something which is unvoiced.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm going to give the episode 10 out of 10 penetrating wounds out of 10.
We went different directions.
We did. I love it. I love this episode so much.
It is as striking and evocative and meaningful to me as it was the first time I saw it. And even the scene in the desert where they first Slayer and Buffy clash, and the shot pulls back and you just see the two of them fighting in this like massive expanse. It's like
in slow motion.
In slow motion, like slow motion's so overused and things sometimes, but I was like it was really it was powerful. It was a powerful episode. It's
a deeply powerful episode. It's also I love it. I think it almost justifies the mess that is season 4 in lots of ways, because like the conclusion of season 4 being such a bit of a nothing burger, like really, I don't know where that came from. It really feels justified when you get an episode like this to actually conclude the season. It feels wonderful. Perfect episode. I would, it's for sure my top 10 episodes of Buffy. Might be my top 5. Probably my top 5.
Yeah, that was definitely my top 5. Yeah. If you guys haven't seen it recently, it's worth rewatching. I think that's the review here.
Okay. So Joel, do you want to do, what do we call this actually? Are you ready to do a quick overview of the season?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Can we think of a name for it?
Yeah, okay. Let's call it the Season Smackdown.
Season Smackdown. That's what it's called now.
We call it Season Snackdown. That'd be better.
So in terms of our season Smackdown, where do you want to start?
Okay, so Joel, what would you give this season out of 10?
I would give this season 8 out of 10 tables to do signs on.
Tables to do signs on? Mm-hmm. What's that from?
That one table they have in the initiative where they do all their signs on it.
Okay, great. Tell me more about
that. I looked back. I think it's a less distinct series and kind of episode to episode than some of the other series. I think the high points are particularly high. It has Hush, it has Restless. Those alone sell Buffy for me in many ways. Fear itself, things like this that I really enjoy. And then the individual episodes, while a lot of them are less distinct, were very comfortable. Mm-hmm. And I found more love for the college setting than I thought I was going to have. And I also felt that Riley as a character was much more redeemed for me in my recollection. Not my favourite character, but really came to work and really tried to make it into something. And then obviously the weak points being the weak points in this season are really, really bad, I think. Yeah. And don't have the excuse of being very early episodes. And that the overall plot is really quite disappointing, I think. Really not, particularly when I'm so interested in say something more to me about science and magic and how it interacts, and it kind of just doesn't really get anywhere. It's
it concludes like a montage sequence of a big fight,
and then Adam has to go back to his planet and is pulled out of frame.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? So
not good.
8 out of 10 for me.
Are we allowed to give it point something? We weren't supposed to. Were we supposed to be a solid?
I think you told me not to, but if you want to,
so if I had to give it a complete integer out of 10, it'd be 7. But I would go 7.5 if I could.
Yeah, I think 7.5 is fair.
Yeah. So anyway, 7.5 or 7. Please run for your lives out of 10. I think that was the line, wasn't it? When the announcer in this episode was like,
"Oh yeah, it's the
demons have escaped.
Please run for your lives."
Yeah. Anyway, everything you just said accurate. I think I'm a little bit bitterer about it than you are. I think Riley didn't have quite as much redemption for me because I was always quite pretty, so I was always really
You resented that.
no.
I mean like resented that he wasn't better because he's pretty.
No, previously I gave him a lot of leeway because he's pretty, and
we were
now
trying
I'm
to say
like,
the same thing.
Yeah, now I'm like, I think the season overall, just structurally lacking. It's very interrupted as a season, and
From a few seasons of Buffy, I think where you could say it could be shorter.
it could be shorter. The initiative stuff, I don't give a shit.
No,
More like I don't initiative, and
that's the bold statement for a man who up until this episode was like, "What's it called again?"
So, but the highs are remarkably high. Hush and Restless, and the This Year's Girls episodes, and Fear Itself, maybe some of the best episodes of Buffy, just generally. So there you go. Joel, what was your favorite episode?
So, I thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to
Which
be
of the
honest.
two episodes is your favorite episode?
No, I want to be honest. I think Restless is my favorite episode. It is. I didn't want to just say that.
Yeah.
But I really thought about it watching this. And I was like, this episode contains for me everything that I find compelling about small town monster of the week stuff, and why those found family connections, when done well, are really provocative, and also why, as much as it is often derided in more quote-unquote serious criticism, the conversation around who is the first Slayer, what happened, backwards in the timeline, what are the Watchers, the mythology and the lore, when done well, is also, it can be thematically and emotionally very significant. And I think this episode really shows me that you can take almost anything, and if you do it well enough and with enough heart, it can be really important.
No doubt.
And I think as an episode, it's a pace setter and a template for so much that's come after it in more than one genre. And I think it stands up exceptionally well. Looking back, this was like 20 years ago.
Bizarre. I agree with you on all that.
Or the other honourable mentions, Hush, obvious reasons, can't say anything more about it, it's great. And Fear Itself is actually a real favourite of mine as a Halloween episode. I think it's really, really fun.
So obviously went back and forth between Hush and Restless. I'm going over Restless too. It's perfection. I think Hush in a lot of ways is, well, they're very different beasts. Hush is consumable to someone who's never watched an episode of Buffy before. It's a perfect horror piece. It's deeply thematic, deeply resonant, and very direct. And this is impossible to watch unless you are a deep Buffy fan.
Yeah.
And yet, I think it's stunning. I think it's beautifully acted, directed, shot, written, and I find it very evocative. I have a very deep and abiding love for Restless. My other ones. The other one I wouldn't have considered Fear Itself, probably, though definitely an honorable mention to some degree. This Year's Girl / Who Are You, I think, is such a strong two-parter, like in terms of just the portrayal of Faith, that it nearly gets up there. Okay, what was the worst episode, do you think, Joel?
So I think one of the obvious ones to say is Beer Bat, but
I don't think so. I think Beer Bat's totally enjoyable.
So. I think it was totally fine. Well, I decided I was Doomed.
Oh.
Do you remember that episode?
No.
See, let's start with that. It's the one where they have to go back to the
three
demons in the high school rooms.
Gross.
And
it was mostly about Riley finding out about Buffy being the Slayer. Was that it?
There was stuff like that. It was. I think when I looked at what did I not like about this season, it wasn't Beer Bag as such, because it was like whatever, they were doing a thing. Doomed for me stuck out because I was like, this is incredibly boring as an episode. It is not just forgettable as in we don't remember it, but it was just like the A, B, and C plot were kind of just like there was a lack of effort there, I think. And I don't like that. So that's kind of for me. I was like, I cannot. I would skip over this episode opposed to watch the season again, which is an odd thing to do. So for me, Doomed.
Fair. So for me, I was between Pangs and Where the Wild Things Are. Pangs survives and gets away with it because of the genuine humor and genuine fun voicing of the episode. It's very funny. It's very well written, while being monstrously stupid in terms of what it says. But like Where the Wild Things Are is just so fucking dull and so bad. Nothing fucking happens for a long time. It's shit and I hate it. It is the episode I would excise from Buffy if I could. I think it's my least favorite episode of Buffy.
It's an odd episode for certain, yeah. So I think we're beer bag apologists. That's kind of official.
So who is your favorite character from the season?
Faith.
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 Faith is your favorite character last season, but go on, please.
Was she? That's funny.
She's in 2 episodes.
I always struggle with this question because when you say favorite character and then bit character, I'm like, we probably have different definitions of what those are. So I'm going to say, okay, I'll give you a couple of feelings. One is Faith in those episodes. I think her arc is just, she brings a lot in. She is a main character. She's for the whole show, she's probably the main character I've come to care more about.
Me too.
So Faith was, I was like, that's kind of interesting. What she does in this season and how she kind of actually contributes to Buffy's development in by what she implies by being there. And then otherwise I was kind of going back and forth between Faith and Willow because I think this is Willow's season in many ways. Like she just has so much growth and she outgrows her premise as a character, which I think is very powerful. And without being trite, she's queer, and that made me feel good.
Me too. So my favorite character of the season is definitely Willow. 100% the queer stuff.
I also picked Willow or Faith because I presumed you were going to pick Willow.
Hugely because of the queer stuff and the growth there, and the scene between Willow and Tara, where Tara says, "I am, yours," is like deeply ingrained in my memory. Very informative, very personal, very good for me. And this is even for a character who like nearly kind of tried to kill herself because of Oz leaving in this season as well. So anyway, love Willow, love her growth in this season. I love her, and I'm really happy to have a season where I finally I'm like Willow is my favorite one. Who is your least favorite character of the season?
Again, without being obvious, I say Adam.
Yeah, fair, totally fair.
I was Adam / Professor Walsh.
Professor Walsh is who I chose.
Yeah, but Adam because. Like I don't want to denigrate in the sense that I think oftentimes with bad characters, the actors do a perfectly serviceable job. I think the actor did as well with that material as he could. It's just a bad character, and it's a bad villain, and it's as a story writer and as someone who enjoys this fiction, it's like this wasn't it, guys.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't like. I like to laugh at Adam now. But I don't like the character. Yeah.
Same. And I kind of similar reasons for Maggie Walsh. And specifically the moment where I was like, Maggie Walsh, my favorite character of the season, was where A, her interaction with Giles, which was so condescending and so stupid, and then B, when she calls Buffy a bitch before he dies. Really unnecessary and weird. All right. Okay. Who was your favorite bit character?
My favorite bit character. So, I went with Harmony.
Great. For
a couple of appearances because I think her actress does a great job of kind of doing a lot with a little at times. Mercedes Benz, that's not a thing. Sorry, Mercedes McNabb is her name. That's her real human name. She does a lot with a little, and she also takes up the mantle of a couple of things from the first 3 seasons. The Cordelia-like character, and the kind of just regular vampire, that doesn't have a soul or a purpose or horns, etc. And I think she is actually she's a great contribution to the scene without ever trying to steal the scene from other people. And I actually I like when she's there. And then my kind of honorable mention was the first Slayer. It's a very brief character. And even outside of the context of how good the episode is, a very powerful character for me. Yeah.
Mine were I couldn't decide between 2. Kathy and Olivia. I really like Kathy because she's a fucking mad bitch.
Is amazing.
Yeah, and I like that she's in 2 episodes. I think she does this great. No explanation either. And I just liked Olivia. I thought she was good. And also wanted to highlight a black character in Buffy because it doesn't happen enough. Least favorite big character?
Forrest.
Okay.
Forrest is everything that's wrong with the initial stories for me. Actor does a perfectly fine job of what he has. I think it is the most one-note character in the entirety of Buffy.
Okay.
Nothing doing, annoyed me.
Yeah.
Got in the way. And for one of the few black characters in the show,
sure,
that is more egregious to me.
It's really uncomfortable that like it was written at the same time as Gunn, who is equally flatly portrayed, I think, in lots of ways. Anyway,
flatly written.
Yeah, flatly written for sure. Definitely not a problem with the actor. It's definitely a problem with the writing. I think the worst big character for me is probably Sunday from episode 1 for first episode. I just hated her. I can't believe they were like, oh, this character has legs, we should maybe bring her back or something. I hated her.
She's going to like overpower Buffy, etc.
I hate her. What is your favorite outfit from the season?
So I don't know if I'm going to take one from you on this. Maybe I shouldn't be starting on all of them.
Okay.
Anya as Bungie.
Oh, that's a great answer.
As a Bungie in Fear Itself. It's just funny. I think it's...
I presume it's going to be Oz's god costume because you have done that before.
Yeah. No, it's... we kind of see Anya for the first time in that to some degree in that episode, and you kind of really get a sense of like what the character comes to be, which is very enjoyable, and I just think it looks funny. And then my honorable mention was Spike as a Watcher.
Fair.
I just think that's funny as well.
Mine was just Willow generally in her big like shearling coat. I just think she looks great in it.
That's a great look, actually. You're 100% right.
And then otherwise, Giles in his many like comfy dad jumpers in this season. He's very few like waistcoats and lots of comfy dad jumpers, and I appreciate that. What was your least favorite outfit?
Actually, also from that episode, Xander in black tie.
Oh yeah,
it just doesn't suit him.
No,
just doesn't suit him. And then my other honorable mention was Spike in the army fatigues, and I think it might have been the Yoko factor. But actually, when you take vampires and you put them in they're not usual clothes, it actually makes them look a bit ridiculous. So I think you shouldn't do that. Yeah.
My least favorite was Jonathan in everything he wears in Superstar, because it's all so badly fitting, even in his
even his dreams.
His dreams, he looks fucking ridiculous. Who was the best monster?
I went with the gentleman.
Oh, very, very fair.
Again, obvious answer, but as an actual monster, as opposed to a theme or a session or that, but as like an actual like cryptid, they're fascinating and scary, and still scary. Yeah. And Doug Jones, FTW.
Yeah. Mine was the first Slayer. And I'm referred to her as a monster not as the character being a monster, but because she's like the monster of this week. Yeah. And I think she's fascinating, brilliant, wonderful. Who was the worst monster for you?
I went with the Chumash Native Americans. Yeah. Because kind of the inverse versus what you just said, they're not a monster. And there was so much that could have been usefully said with that episode that was just massively bungled. So as a monster of the week, having the Native Americans from whom you've stolen the land attack you is not a good look.
No, it's not. Okay, let's do a very quick Cordelia chase because we are now running an hour and 35 minutes.
Beautiful. I might pack some of the Angel stuff into next week when we
sure.
We it's kind of linked up with start of season 2.
I can't wait for season 2 episode 1. It's the really good one, isn't it? The one about the hotel.
I believe so.
Oh, nice.
I actually would like to maybe unpack this episode of Angel in a little bit more detail, because it's actually a really good episode. Yeah. So it is Tashan Shu in LA. Living and dying in LA. Yeah. So great pun. I think fantastic pun in the title. And we have the culmination of the season. We have Wolf from Her Heart come into full conflict with Angel. Lindsay is fully embedded in Wolf from Her Heart now, and they call forth a demon for the other side, a warrior called Voka, who is played by Tog Stashik, who also played the I think Mfashnik demon in the Slayer Fest episode, and is also the director of the John Wick films, and is a prolific stunt performer who we've mentioned before. And yeah, it's actual high stakes for the season, and basically systematically goes about cutting off Angel, because we find out that Angel will take part in the apocalypse, the true apocalypse that they're trying to bring about. It's the question is what side will he be on. So they imbue Cordelia with debilitating visions, painful visions of terror and all the pain in the world. They kill the oracles who have been helping Angel. They hospitalize Wesley, and then they blow up the season 1 set and blow up the investigation building, and it pushes Angel kind of close to the dark side in many ways. But there's a lot to actually unpack about the value of Angel as a show. Again, when he kind of sees that what actually motivates him and keeps him from going down that road is the fact that he actually does see Wesley and Cordelia as family and fights for them, and kind of says, Kate Lockley, stop with your moping, your dad's dead, it wasn't my fault, get out of my way, go and help me with this, you understand, family, and go get my people back. And there's a great fight scene in Wolf from Her Heart's property as Angel fights Lindsay while they're trying to summon this demon that's going to be the beast that's going to ruin Angel. And when Lindsay thinks he has him cornered, Angel cuts his hand off in what I think is a very cool moment, to be honest. You know,
yeah,
a sense of
it's a real season-defining moment.
There is, and there's a real look of Angel just being so incredibly tired by dealing with people who don't understand that he's going to kick their ass in these kind of situations. And then the great cliffhanger, and which I think does denote that we're going to go a little deeper as opposed to a little flatter is that the beast that they bring through is Darla, who they've complete shock, I think, well earned, and they resurrect her because she is going to be able to corrupt Angel because she did initially. So I think that's right. I'm like, cool.
Yeah, and of course the kicker being Shanshu is not just that Angel will die in the apocalypse, because I think he thinks he's going to die the whole episode. Wesley reveals that he may have mistranslated, and it might be that he has to live. Yeah, he might be human.
Except he translates it as a word that means both to live and to die, and that something is undead, as Angel is, can't die because he's not alive. So basically his reward for eventually being the champion of the powers that be will he'll eventually get to be human. And
this is the story now. That's the driving motivation for Angel going forward.
And Cordelia also has some development because she kind of, having really experienced all this pain, is like, we're doing something important here and I want to grow and be part of that. So
of course the big note there, and we'll leave it there, is that Cordelia incapacitated as a woman for the whole episode with like hysteria and pain and invasive like thoughts. It's very misogynist.
Yeah, so she basically, as in so many texts, she is hurt as an element of Angel's pain.
Yeah.
So that is what it is. But overall, that being said, maybe appropriately and poignantly and pointedly, I would probably give this episode a 9 failed feminist gestures out of 10. I think it's well, we'll talk about that in a second.
I would give it 8 failed feminist gestures out of 10. Okay, so our quick Cordelia chase,
very quick season
smackdown will
with the Fang Gang.
Yeah. So Joe, what was the best Angel episode of the season?
I would probably have to say Sanctuary, which is the Faith episode.
Okay.
Because again, my faith arc I'm on at the moment, but between that and I think the Shanshu in LA, because I think what the Shanshu in LA does well is actually sex a premise for the show, which was kind of sorely needed. So
my two were actually 5x5, which is the first Faith episode of the two, so not the one that you chose, and specifically because of the scene with the rain and everything, incredible, or I Will Remember You, which is obviously just both great episodes. What do you think was the worst episode of the season?
So I had two. One was, first thing honorable mention. One was I Fall to Pieces, which was which was you'll talk a little bit about it, but we actually nearly turned it off. We were like, I remember I was watching that and I was like, we're bored. It was the one where there's
lots of like montages of him like following women.
It was a plastic surgeon where he's stalking the woman. It was where they tried to make the victim the kind of the main focus of the camera for the for the episode, and it just was like real. Shit. It needed a rewrite.
What was the one that you chose in the end?
The other one I had was In the Dark, which is the one where Spike comes to
gross
Angel, etc. It's the
child molester guy.
Yes, it's the third episode, I think, and Oz is there as well. And it has real growing pains where it's like this: you're trying to break away, you're trying to have the Buffy stuff here as well. It's real adolescent, and it was like they kind of don't ever have a crossover like that extensive again. I just think it's really awkward.
It was nearly my choice for the worst episode.
What's that?
Hero.
Oh, leave Glenn Quinn alone. He's dead.
Okay. God, that was long. We need to finish, Joel.
Yeah. Well, marathon of good content. So we will. We'll give an overall rating for the season actually of Angel.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's probably a 6 feminist gestures.
Yeah,
for the whole season.
I'm going to give it a generous 6.
Yeah. Okay, folks. Thanks for listening to all that talk.
I'm going to rest my voice.
Yeah, but it's a podcast. You can pause it. You can come back to it. We presume you've done that. No one has a gun to your head. But for this season of Buffy, this season of Buffy Boys, we're going to draw it to a close. And I think from myself and Brian Booker, thank you very much for your patronage, for your engagement, and for giving us a reason to sit down and do this for an hour and 35 minutes.
An hour and 41.
With that, I will leave you there. I will say we will see you next season for season 5 with Dracula.
Yeah.
And if you enjoyed this episode, maybe don't recommend this particular one as the first one for people to listen to. But if you feel so inclined, tell your friends, tell your primal source of power about Buffy Boys. And we will see you.
See ya.
Next time.
Oh, should I just leave the whole thing?
As if that hasn't happened before.
It has. Okay. Bye, guys.
See ya.